The Mecklenburg County election debates are a service of WTVI, Mecklenburg County, and the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The views and opinions expressed in these debates are those of the candidates and do not necessarily represent the views of WTVI, its management, Mecklenburg County, or the League of Women Voters.
PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters present Election Debate 2016.
Hello, I'm Sean Flynn, Managing Editor with Time Warner Cable News. Welcome to the U.S. Congressional House District 9 primary debate sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. During the next 20 minutes, we'll speak with two of the three Republican candidates running for U.S. Congressional House District 9. I personally reached out to Congressman Robert Pittenger's office. His staffers told me he's currently in Washington during this recording. He would love to take part in this debate, but he's, quote, not going to miss doing his job to try and keep his job. Now, the newly drawn 9th Congressional District now includes southeastern Mecklenburg, all of Union, Anson, Richmond, Scotland, Robeson, and portions of Cumberland and Bladen counties. Questions for the debate were provided by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The candidates were not given the questions in advance. I'll call on the candidates in random order, and each of you will have 30 seconds to answer the questions. Some may be just a simple yes or no. If you would like to challenge your opponent, raise your yellow card that each of you were given. You have 30 seconds to respond. Each of you have 30-second challenge cards. You will also be allowed to make a 30-second closing statement. Now, the Republican candidates for the U.S. Congressional House Districts 9 are Mr. Mark Harris and Mr. Todd Johnson. That's enough of me. Let's get to you guys. Our first question. The state redrew all these districts 9. What do you think of the new Congressional District 9? Mr. Harris?
Well, thank you, Sean, and let me just say first what a pleasure it is to be here today. The 9th District, as it is drawn, is definitely very different from what it had been. As you described, it has been really Charlotte-centered in Mecklenburg and a very metropolitan district. And now, though it includes those 50 precincts in Mecklenburg County, it is a much more rural district. And the dynamics have changed considerably, particularly when you consider that really some of the counties in the new 9th District have some of the highest unemployment rates. So it's a very different district. I think it's an opportunity for us to have a fresh face and a new voice in Washington, D.C.
All right, Mr. Johnson.
Well, I think that the new 9th District does provide a nice cross-section of North Carolina, from the urban area to the rural area, and then also getting into the military facilities down at Fort Bragg. The new 9th District does provide a new opportunity for fresh leadership here from North Carolina in Washington, D.C., and a new day is ahead of us for that. I think it's a great part of the state. It's a great part of the nation. I'm thankful to have called it home for my entire life.
All right, gentlemen, for the last couple of months, all we've pretty much heard about in Charlotte and across North Carolina, now the nation, is HB 2. As an elected official, federally elected official, how would you handle the stalemate between the Justice Department, the Obama administration, Governor McCrory, state legislature, Charlotte City Council, and how would you deal with that, and how would you work with everybody over HB 2? Mr. Johnson?
Well, quite frankly, I think it's a bad idea that we're even discussing which bathroom a man should go to or which bathroom a woman should go to. We have much greater issues in this nation that we're facing: economic issues, the struggles of small businesses and families across this country, yet we're talking about which bathroom someone should go to. Personally, I think the federal government should stay out of the state's business. I think states should have the right to govern themselves. The people of this state have voiced their opinions, yet the judicial system has stepped in and tried to impose its will by bullying the states around, and ultimately North Carolina should determine its own destination.
Really quickly, do you support HB 2? Or
I do support HB 2. I feel like, again, men should go to men's bathrooms and women should go to women's bathrooms.
All right, Mr. Harris.
Yes, I am a supporter of HB 2, and I think that one of the questions that I have wondered throughout this whole process is when you have the federal government, from the Justice Department, the Education Department, the Transportation Department, others that have raised questions about actually withdrawing funding from North Carolina. My question has been, where has been our congressman? And I've been asking that for 2 weeks now. And because I just imagine that as the representative for the 9th District, I would want to be on the front line standing up for the people of North Carolina, for our governor, for our legislature. And I think it's important with HB 2. Let's remember where it all started, right in Charlotte, North Carolina.
All right. I'm sure we could talk the entire debate about that, but we'll move on to some other issues. Now, Republican leader Newt Gingrich and Democratic President Bill Clinton worked together to keep the government going during one of the most successful economic expansions during the 1990s. Yet today we find very little evidence of collaboration between political parties. How can you, as an elected official, work together with the other side to try and actually make something positive happen? Mr. Harris?
Well, one of the things that I've really spent my whole life doing, 28 years as a senior pastor, is working with people from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life, all different perspectives, and bringing them together really for a cause that is much greater than themselves. My hope is that we can get to a point here that we can get back to a time where folks will see America from that 30,000-foot view and begin to do more of what's best for America rather than what's best for political expediency or for a person's reelection campaign. So that would be my hope, is that we work together to accomplish goals.
All right. Mr. Johnson.
Well, ultimately, we all know that compromise and working together is what gets things done in Washington. Unfortunately, there has been a lack of compromise, but also a lack of leadership that we've seen from our very own Republican Party, a lack of understanding and listening to the people and realizing what's important. Many times, especially candidates running for office, they like to tell you what they think and what they feel, yet then when they go to Washington, they vote a different way. And I've often said candidates or public officials, they're no better than the votes they cast. So ultimately, we have to work together, but at the end, sacrificing our principles and what we've stood for, and ultimately the voice of the people of the 9th District is not an option on the table for me.
All right. A September 2014 Harvard study found the growth disparity between the very wealthy and the lower and the middle classes is no longer sustainable. What is your solution, Mr. Johnson?
I think my solution is a proven method that's been tried and tested for many years, and it works. It's the free enterprise system. In Union County, as a commissioner there, we were facing staggering unemployment rates of close to 11% when I filed for office. The day that I left office, unemployment was down to 4.2. Now, there wasn't a magical wand that was waved or anything like that. We made simple, common sense solutions, such as getting government out of the lives of people and getting government out of the lives of small businesses, letting the free enterprise system flourish and do what they do best. Many times government's not the solution, they are always the problem.
All right. Same question to you, Mr. Harris.
Well, I would agree that really the big issue that we continue to deal with is with jobs and with our economy. And I believe that when you look at what we are experiencing for the last several years, we continue to feel the boot on the neck of small businesses through Obamacare. I think that's a serious problem that Congress needs to deal with, and I'm a firm proponent in repealing and replacing Obamacare. I think that's a serious issue. I think overregulation is a serious issue, and we have seen a period of time in American history where folks who found themselves out of work would go start their own businesses. But we read report after report that that's changed. People can no longer go start their own businesses because of the overregulation they're facing.
All right. When 70% of the U.S. economy depends on domestic spending, is it time to support a $15 minimum wage? We've been hearing a lot about that lately. What do you think?
No, Sean, I genuinely believe that history and studies will show that increasing the minimum wage so many times manages to cause jobs to not be created. In fact, it cuts out many of those entry-level jobs. I remember working as a 15-and-a-half-year-old at Lottie's Shoe Store in Winston-Salem, where I grew up, and I worked for minimum wage. And when you start telling store owners and business owners that they've got to pay a certain level, that somehow that's going to resurrect the economy, I just don't buy it. And in fact, I genuinely believe that government, as we've said earlier, needs to step back.
Mr. Johnson.
I agree. Minimum wage of $15 is not acceptable. It would break the backs of small businesses. Myself included, as a teenager, I was a busboy at Western Sizzlin in Wadesboro, North Carolina, making minimum wage. There's no way that small businesses can continue to succeed and operate having to pay a minimum wage of $15. It simply is, again, another example of government overreaching its boundaries and going into small businesses, making decisions for those small businesses that it has no business making.
So how would both of you try and support, we hear example after example of folks who are working 2-3 jobs, but they're not able to meet that minimum living standard. And how would you help those families? Mr. Johnson?
Agree. Again, I think that regulations that small businesses are encountering and the overburden of taxes, that is continuing to depress the job markets that folks are able to contend with and to be able to obtain. When you look at health care costs that small businesses are being faced with and forced down their throats, that directly impacts the amount of compensation that a company can pay a worker. And so continuing to pull back the regulations is the solution. The free enterprise system works. We have to get the government out of small business.
Mr. Harris?
I really believe, Sean, that when you stop and think about it, the lower taxes on working families has been something that has worked. We've seen it happen in North Carolina as we've pulled tax rates down, and it has really caused what we know of as the Carolina comeback. I think some of that common sense needs to go to Washington, D.C., and I think, as was stated, I think that when you look at health care reform, over-regulation, these are barriers to economic growth that are extremely important, and we've got to deal with them.
All right, we're going to talk a little about something that would have helped me a couple of years ago, but the ship has sailed for me. Congress is considering a Family Act providing 12 weeks of paid time off for employees to care for family members. It would be funded by matched employer contributions towards an insurance policy. Do you support this policy? Yes or no?
Well, I think it is extremely important for families to be able to have that time. I've seen it in my own family of one of my sons who worked for Sam's Club and got a period of time off when his wife had their first child. But I do think it's critically important for the companies to be the ones to make that decision. Again, every step that federal government makes in trying to set social agenda or set policy in that way is a dangerous step. And so I do think companies need to recognize it. I think they need to see the benefit of it, and I think it does produce better workers.
All right, Mr. Johnson.
I agree with Dr. Harris on this. I feel like companies should have the ability for self-determination in the policies that they have, but I'd also encourage small businesses and corporations to support families, because family values and families are the backbone of our economy and the backbone of our nation. Everything starts at home, and the ability for someone to stay at home and support their family during a time of crisis is definitely something that most corporations should consider supporting.
60% of the federal gas tax is used for highway and bridge construction. The federal gas tax hasn't changed since 1993, even though the inflation over that period was 64.6%. Should the gas tax rate be changed to provide more funding for highways and bridges? And some of our government officials say, a lot of our bridges are in desperate need of repair. Mr. Johnson?
Short answer, no. I feel like we should use the gas tax for what it's for. And if we would stop rating these funds to fund other entitlements, then we would have all the money that we need. We don't have a revenue problem; we have a spending problem.
All right, Mr. Harris?
Yes, I think I think he's exactly right, and I would agree with that we are in a place where really and truly the spending has got to be brought under control. And we've not only seen it with the transportation fund and other things that get rated, but we've seen it with other things such as Social Security and other ways that monies have been spent, and we've got to get our spending under control.
All right, I'm being told I have to ask this question. Would you support H.R. 1176, titled the Empower Act, that expands public campaign financing for presidential elections to also cover congressional elections? Yes or no?
Would you repeat that question?
Would you support H.R. 1176, titled the Empower Act, that expands public campaign financing for presidential elections to also cover congressional elections?
I'll be honest, I'm not totally familiar with exactly what that House resolution is that you're describing.
Mr. Johnson?
I also am not familiar with that. I would simply say, as long as it's transparent and open, I think that's ultimately what we need in campaign finance, is an open dialogue and open information for the voting population and the citizens to see where the campaign finances are coming from.
Real quickly, we are running out of time, so I want to get to a couple questions here. What, if any, restrictions would you place on buyers and sellers of guns at this point? Mr. Johnson?
None.
Mr. Harris?
I would say none. I'm a firm supporter of the Second Amendment, and I believe that folks have that right to keep and bear arms, and I would not support any further restrictions.
Any solutions to all the gun violence that we've seen lately?
I think that you're going to see an end to gun violence when you begin to deal with the issues that are at the root of them. Just about every mass shooting we've seen, I think, comes down to somebody that had a mental health issue. But one of the issues I think you always come down to is the breakdown of the family. I don't think we're hearing enough about that every one of these individuals that has been involved in some way, shape, or form in the mass killings we've seen over the last 5 years, you see a breakdown in their own families. And until we start dealing with that issue in America and rebuilding the family structure, you're not going to see an end to violence with guns or weapons of any other choice.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Harris. The issue that we have is something much greater than guns or even these violent acts. It goes back to a breakdown in the family values and the foundation of the home. So until we address these issues, guns are part of our life. They're a Second Amendment right that I fully support. I fully support the Constitution and the right to bear arms, and I feel like that's a right that the government should not infringe upon.
Okay, we don't have that much time. Just finish this sentence. My role as a congressman is, Mr. Johnson?
To represent the people of the 9th District to the best of my ability, to be their voice in Washington, and to always speak truth and to always make sure the folks of the 9th District know where I stand.
A lot of commas there, a lot of commas. Mr. Harris?
My role would be to be a leader of character, consistency, and courage, and one who would represent the views of the 9th Congressional District, both in voice and in action in caring for the constituents.
Crafty with those commas and semicolons, et cetera, et cetera. All right, we are really getting close to out of time. Each of you have 30 seconds for your closing comment. Mr. Harris?
Well, I would just say that I would ask the voters of the 9th District to cast your vote for Mark Harris for the U.S. House of Representatives. There's no question we are living at a serious, serious time, a time that we need real leadership. There's a vacuum of leadership in Washington, D.C., and folks are fed up with Washington, D.C. as it is, and they have every reason to be. $19 trillion of debt, $120 trillion of unfunded liabilities, and we need an individual who has not only words to give, but a proven track record that will show I'm willing to stand and fight for the people of this district.
All right, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you again for having us. Not only has Congress collectively failed us, I feel like our representation here in the 9th District has also failed us. It's important that we send someone to Washington that listens and represents, and more importantly, votes how the people of the 9th District feel. Being from Union County, the home of Jesse Helms, he always spoke the truth. And you always knew where he stood, even if you didn't always agree with him. And in the end, we need leadership that will always speak truth, stand on what's right, and cast the vote the right way.
All right. And I do want to thank all of you for participating in this U.S. Congressional House District 9 race. I want to point out whoever wins will be running against Christian Cano, who is the only Democrat nominee running in this race. I want to thank all of you for watching. Make sure you go out and vote.